WLS, WLS. Keep your radio on, keep your radio on. It makes your day move along. Leave your radio on, leave your radio on. Music is great, the news up to date on WLS. In Chicago, in Chicago, in Chicago.
Welcome to the Veterans Special Programs American National Network, V-SPANN. Our spotlight today shines on the radio industry and what it was like in the golden days of rock and roll. In the next 30 minutes, we're going to get some inside information and stories behind the music from a man who delivered that music to us on the radio. Our special guest spent 48 years in Chicago and is best known as Mother Webber's oldest son, Clark. Clark Webber, welcome to our V-SPANN program.
Rich, thank you very much. And by the way, I have a specially starched shirt that I'm wearing today, so I'll sit up straight. Otherwise, I'll fall right on the floor at this age.
Well, to look at how starched that is, you have to sit up straight.
Yes, I do. Yes, I
Golly,
do.
I'm thinking that when Mother Webber had you, that the doctor probably delivered you and said, "Congratulations, Mrs. Webber, you have a 8-pound, 7-ounce radio announcer."
Well, that's pretty close to it. When he delivered me, he turned to my mother and he said, "My gosh, he's got an ugly face." And my mother said, "You're holding him upside down."
Oh, it happens all the time. Radio. It's been in your voice. You have been involved in radio from being a teenager in ham radio.
Yes.
Yes. What was the interest?
Well,
what was the draw?
I became enamored with ham radio in right after the war, right after the Second World War. My uncle was a ham, and the technical aspects of radio just appealed to me. And I was 17, and I got my ham call, W9FFB, which I still have today, and that began to propel me in the area of broadcasting. That, and I love to stand up in front of an audience. You can tell.
I can tell. I love the mellifluous sound of your voice. I use that because I always wanted to use that word in a sentence.
Well, there's a confession here, and ladies and gentlemen, you might just as well know this now. This is not my real voice. I don't know if you are aware of the fact, but for years the old Marshall Fields sold resonant underwear. It's a t-shirt, and you put it on, and you get this kind of dulcet tone. My real voice is up here somewhere.
We're back to that starched shirt again.
Yes.
I'm thinking, now you started out in Wisconsin, Waukesha, Wisconsin, and there was something that happened early on that got you listening to the radio and wanting to be on the radio.
Well, yes, it was. I don't know how many members of your audience remember Angora sweaters, but there was a girl named Barbara Taylor who was in my homeroom. I was a 17-year-old high school junior, and Barbara wore Angora sweaters. And she began to fill out the sweater. Can we say that on television? I think so. And she wouldn't give me the right time of day. So I sat down with Mother Webber, and I said, "Mom, I've got a problem. This Barbara Taylor is lovely, and she won't pay any attention to me." And my mother gave me the greatest advice in the world, Rich. She said, "Everything you want is on the other side of fear." I said, "What do you mean by that?" She said, "You're going to have to get past your fear, whatever it is, and you will succeed." Well, a few days later, there was an article in the high school newspaper about WFOX in Milwaukee inviting teenagers to come on the air and be interviewed. I thought it was a great way to impress Barbara's Angora sweater. Impress Barbara, I'm sorry. And so I wrote a letter. And the letter is in the book, by the way, from March 1948, inviting me to be on the air. And I did, but I told Barbara before I went on the air that I was going to be on and to be sure and listen. Well, I did the show. I was so impressed. I even dedicated a record to Barbara. Nelson Riddle's The Saber Dance. Wasn't that romantic, Richard? Huh?
Wow.
But I had an epiphany. I walked out of the radio station, and at 17, I knew what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. Got back to the high school, and I said to Barbara, "Well, what did you think?" And she gave me my first marketing lesson. And the F word, not the naughty F word, The other F word, frequency, because I hadn't told her often enough I was going to be on the show, and she forgot to listen. But that's okay. I was exposed to radio, and the virus took, and the rest is history.
Yes, and somewhere between your success here in Chicago and Milwaukee, enter the Korean War.
Oh, the Korean War. I had a wonderful time. I was there for 3 years, 11 months, and 16 days. Do you think I had a good time?
I'm thinking not.
Not. Do you know that when the Korean War broke out, there were only 50 miles of paved road in all of Korea? That's a fact. 50 miles. It was a backward country, to say the least. Japan had occupied it since 1910, and they used the Koreans as slave labor. So we went in there to virtually free the slaves, if you will, and we lost 36,000 American GIs in 2 years in Korea. It was a dumb war.
And unfortunately, the forgotten war, which is why we are talking about it here on V-SPANN.
Yes.
The interesting thing, when you joined the Navy, you didn't have to go through training.
No, I had been in the Naval Reserve, and they took one look at my background and said, "You are a ham radio operator, you know Morse code." And I said, "Well, duh, yes, of course." And they said, "We're going to make you a radio operator." So I got no schooling out of the Navy. They just put me in a position in front of a radio transmitter and said, "Do your thing." So that was the extent of my education in the Navy.
Did you really say duh?
I don't believe so. Sir. I said duh,
Duh,
sir.
sir, as long as
There's a difference.
Now, you got out in about 1954.
1954.
And started to get involved in radio now. You started to pursue it as a career in Waukesha.
First job, WAUX, Waukesha, Wisconsin, doing the morning show of all things. I don't know how I lucked into that, but they saw something there and said, "You're perfect for mornings." And the rest was history. I went from Waukesha to West Bend, where I played Whoopie John and the Six Fat Dutchmen on a polka station. That was, Rich, that was awful.
And what's even worse is I know who Whoopie John is.
That is scary.
That is absolutely scary. In a lot of lives, mine, yours, serendipitous event occurred. You worked with Sam Holman.
Yes, I did. In Milwaukee at WRIT. Sam was an alcoholic, and I saved Sam's life one night when he said something to a parking lot attendant who took umbrage, picked up a tire chain, and was going to decapitate Sam. So I saw a squad car nearby, whistled for the squad, they came over, and Sam said, "You saved my life, someday I'll pay you back." Well, he later became the program director of WLS in Chicago. Called me one day and said, "It's time to pay you back." And I said, "You mean I got to extract you from another drunken situation?" "No," he said, "I want you to be the all-night man on WLS. Can you get down here today?" Rich, there are still 4 sets of tire marks on I-94 in Milwaukee where I just burned rubber to get down to Chicago and be on the air. The rest is history.
And you were married at the time. You married
Yes.
Joan. If I recall, the timing couldn't have been worse.
That's true. We had 4 daughters, all within 24 months. We had a 2-year-old, a 1-year-old, and then the twins were born. Joan said she was running out of names to call me. And then I got a new hobby. But I commuted for almost 2 years between Milwaukee and Chicago doing that all-night show on WLS.
And that's passion. That's passion for the business.
That's greed.
But it came with the business. Now, at the time, rock and roll was taking its foothold. It was the foundation of so many radio stations, and the stations. I grew up as a teenager listening to WLS, WCFL, but they were all doing exactly the same thing, playing exactly the same music. What happened were personalities were added so that you would listen to the people, not the music.
They were part of it. That all started right after the Second World War. Those veterans came home, got married, and had children. I realize today that's a little backward. They do it differently today, but in those days they got married first. Well, by the late 1950s, you had a whole new crop of 12, 13, 14-year-old kids, primarily girls. Girls were the ones that bought the records, with one exception, and that was Elvis. But all of the other artists were generated as a result of these teenage girls buying the records. Well, by the 1950s, this was the first of rock and roll. And those of us who were in rock and roll recognized the opportunity to capitalize on it, and we created larger-than-life personalities who were part of the rock and roll music. And as a result of that, our careers grew, the rock and roll musicians grew, of course, and we were all lumped in together as part of the process of these kids growing up.
And what a process it was.
It was a fun time. I still have people coming up and tell me, I used to listen to you every night with my transistor radio under the pillow. Or one guy came up to me and said, boy, I'll never forget you on the air. One night we were parked at Grant Park, and I said, I don't want to know the story.
And there's so many stories. There are thousands and thousands of stories to talk about. And one of the things that I think it's fair to mention is that during the portion of this career that was launching at WLS, you had to have a tremendous relationship with Joan to support you traveling for as long as you did.
Yes.
Talk about that.
Well, I tell aspiring people in broadcasting today, there are a number of pitfalls, and one of the most important things is your mate. If you're dating someone who doesn't like show business, and there are a lot who don't, because of the fact that you're on a pedestal, and there is a certain amount of adoration that comes from the fans, from your audience, and if you have a mate who can't handle that kind of competition, you either better get a career with the post office and keep that woman, or get another mate, because there are many, many careers that were shattered as a result of that adoration. I had a woman come up to us one day recently at church, and she said, "You're Clark Weber?" And I said, "Yes." And I said, "And this is Mrs. Weber." She said, "Oh," she said, "I want you to know that I got up with your husband every morning for years." How naughty, right? Joan turns to her and she said, "Well, I want you to know I went to bed with him for all these years, and it's no big deal."
The career that you've enjoyed is a big deal. We talked about show business, and first and foremost, it is business.
Yes, it is.
It is all about making money, but it's a fun business. It's a show business. When we return, you're going to hear about some of the artists and what they would do to get their music played on the radio in this radio business. This is V-SPANN.
Hey, man, que pasa? Ron Riley's my name. I'm from WLS Radio Chicago. I thought we'd do an oldies show here for you. And I brought along in my left-hand corner here one of the biggest oldies I know, Clark.
Incidentally, this program is
Clark.
not being sent to the VC overseas. I want that known here and now. Ringo, Ron Riley, you're with us again.
Clark.
In body,
Weber.
but not in mind, unfortunately.
Hi, I'm Ernie Scatton, Education Director here at Illinois Center for Broadcasting, the downtown campus. And I am also a U.S. Navy veteran. I served in the Navy from 1987 until 1991, and it was four of the best years of my life. They made me grow up, and they allowed me to do things that I normally wouldn't have been able to do, and they let me tap potential that I didn't know I had. But knowing that I had something to do with defending this nation or giving back to a place that has given so much to me and my family, it made me feel good. One day, as I was on my way to work, I heard a commercial saying, "If you want to be on the air, go to Illinois Center for Broadcasting." And I said yes. I called that day, I went that night for my test, and I passed, and in a week I was in school. I've never looked back. I walked out of school into a 50,000 watt station, ESPN 1000 here in Chicago, and I didn't leave for 9 years. I owe all that to ICB. You know, I guess to sum it all up, the Navy prepared me for life, but ICB prepared me for my future and what I have now, my future in broadcasting.
Ladies and gentlemen, Clark Weber gives great radio on
WCFL, Chicago.
Yeah, this guy Clark Weber here, I want to tell you a little bit about him, man. He's not only the morning disc jockey here on WLS Radio, the world's only Hertz-Retta disc jockey.
Yes.
The world's first prehistoric disc jockey.
That's true.
But he's also a program director. He's my boss. Did you ever spell boss backwards, huh? That's double S-O-B.
Riley, I've got to say that you have come a long way for an incomplete.
This is the Veterans Special Programs American National Network. Our V-SPANN Spotlight today is on the radio industry, and we're talking with our special guest, Mother Weber's oldest son, Clark Weber. Some stories that you have encountered, experiences and memories are just phenomenal from the perspective that we listened to this music. We listened to you. Anybody who grew up in the Midwest as a baby boomer knows the music, but you've captured some of these stories in your book, Clark Weber's Rock and Roll Radio, the fun years, 1955 to 1975. And reading the book myself, it's just amazing, some of the experiences that you encountered.
Well, I had a fun time. I was the program director of WLS, so I was in charge of all of the music that was played on the air. Now, I should explain to you, being a program director of a radio station, don't get puffed up over that, because being a PD at a radio station is a little bit like running a cemetery. You've got a lot of people underneath you and no one is listening. But as the program director, I would choose the music. One day a man came to me and he said, I've got some kids in the family. I want you to listen to their song. So I listened to it and I said, no, it's not quite going to do it. He said, what do you mean? This is going to be a hit. I said, no, I don't think so. He said, I want to bring the kids to you. I said, what do you mean to me? He said, I want to bring them into your office. I want them to perform for you in front of your office. I said, all right, tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Well, lo and behold, he brings the band, the music, the whole 9 yards. They perform the song in my office with the lead singer, 7-year-old Michael Jackson, dancing on my desk. I still didn't play the music, the first Jackson 5 song, until about 3 or 4 months later. But many of those artists were deathly afraid of going in front of the audience. Get a call from Columbia one day. He said, we booked a brand new audience into Mr. Kelly's on Rush Street. She's 21 years old. It's her first job. No one has heard of her. We want you to come down and meet her and try to put her at ease. So my wife and I went down, met this woman. She sang, and it's a good thing we were in the audience. There were only 3 people in the audience at Mr. Kelly's. Sat down with us, and she was in high dudgeon. She was infuriated. She said, unless there are 25 people at this next show, I'm not going on. Well, George Marienthal, the owner, got me aside. He said, what am I going to do with this screwball kid? I can't guarantee 25 people in the audience. I said, let me see your business card, George. So he reached in, he showed it to me, and it was blank on the back. And I said, George, I want you to write on the back of this thing, this is good for 2 free drinks tonight at 9 o'clock. I want you to go out to Rush Street, pass it around to every drunk you see. We'll fill the place up. Meanwhile, this young 21-year-old singer says, I mean it, Clark. I'm not going on unless there are people in that audience. And I said to her, what are you afraid of? She said, I'm afraid of not being accepted. Remember earlier when I said everything you want is on the other side of fear? So I went up behind stage with her. She looked out in the audience. It's 5 minutes to 9, and there were maybe 40 drunks out in the audience drinking. They didn't care who came out on the stage. Well, she went out imbued with enthusiasm and acceptance, sang her soul out. There was a reporter from the Tribune who was in that audience, wrote a glowing review, and from that day on, she had a full audience. Today, that woman would not have to pamper the audience with drinks in order to get them to come to hear. Matter of fact, she's going to be in Chicago this week. Her name, Barbra Streisand. Another story?
Another story.
Kid came up to me on a Saturday. There were 2 kids that would come up to the radio station every Saturday to see the DJs in person. We had Andy Frayne ushers that would crowd control. One of the kids would come in and he'd be there about an hour or so, and his mother would call, and she'd call me and she'd say, Clark, is Bobby still there? And I said, yes, Mrs. Surratt. She said, would you please send him home? Bob Surratt on Fox TV. The other one was on a paper route, and after he peddled his Saturday papers, he'd take the train from Hammond Gary, come into the station on Saturday and stand there. And one day he said to me, Mr. Weber, someday I'm going to do this for a living. He was about 16, 17. I said, really? Oh, he said, I'm going to do it. So I got Art Roberts aside, one of the DJs, and I said, Art, put the kid on the air for a few minutes, but we won't tell him. So the kid is standing there, and I walk up to him. I said, young man, follow me. He said, where are we going? I said, follow me. So I took him in, put him on the air. Art talked to him for about 10 minutes, and the kid came out. He was ashen white. He was just chalk white. Wow! He said, Mr. Weber, I'm going to do this someday. I'm serious. And if you don't think he was serious, tonight at 6:30, turn on Wheel of Fortune and watch Pat Sajak.
Now, WLS, at that time, a clear channel radio station, meaning no other radio station in the nation had the frequency of 890, with 50,000 watts, which to most people doesn't mean a lot unless you're in radio. It's a powerhouse. Yes. AM radio, I used to listen to WLS in Alaska, through skip waves. Powerhouse radio station, which meant during the rock and roll years, if an artist had his or her record played, there was a good chance that it would become a hit because the Midwest and WLS was the springboard for many Chicago bands. Talk to us about some of the bands that you gave a chance to.
Well, I'll tell you the story of a kid I gave a chance to. He was a pre-med student at NYC in New York. His parents wanted him to be a doctor. He was a songwriter and he loved to sing. Well, his parents he drove his parents crazy until they said, look, we're friends with Neil Bogart. He owns Bang Records here in New York. We're going to take you to see him and you're going to audition and see whether or not you have any talent. So they auditioned him, and Bogart said, kid, not bad. The kid had the summer off. He said, we're going to record a song. I'm going to send you to Chicago. A friend of mine by the name of Kent Beauchamp owns Royal Disc Records, and he knows Clark Weber. Clark Weber. So they did. They recorded the kid. The kid brought the record to Beauchamp. Beauchamp brought the record to me, and I said, what's the background on the record? He said, there isn't any. The kid is just, he wants to sing. So I listened to the record and I said, it's not bad, not bad. I said, bring the kid in. Is he out in the lobby? He said, no, he's standing in the corner of Michigan and Wacker. He's afraid to come upstairs because he's afraid of what you'll say. I said, get the kid in here. So he brought the kid in and I said, young man, I like your record. I said, as a matter of fact, we're going to play that song. When I wrote the story in the book, I said I thought he was going to have a laundry-threatening moment. Publisher said, you can't say that in the book. We played the record. It became a hit. Last year, that same kid, now a grown man, was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The record was on Bang Records. It was called Cherry Cherry, and the kid was Neil Diamond. Everything you want is on the other side of fear. Remember that. Whatever you do in life, showbiz, whatever it is, get past your fear, and you've got it.
A big part of your responsibilities at WLS was also doing record hops.
Yes.
A big thing back in the 60s.
Yes, it was. We made, in those days, $300 to $350 a piece on a record hop. You could do 3 or 4 of those a week if your health could stand it. I had my own plane, so I was able to scour the Midwest night after night. One night I did something very bad. Lou Jack and I were booked into adjoining towns in Mattoon, Illinois. And I said to Larry, look, I'm flying my twin-engine Piper Aztec down to Mattoon. It has snowed for the last several days. The roads are very slippery. Would you like to fly with me in my plane? We'll fly to Mattoon. Your people will pick you up. Mine will pick me up. We'll go our separate ways. We'll meet back at the Mattoon airport, fly my plane back, and we'll be back in Chicago in 30 minutes. Now, I should explain, working with Lou Jack, he was a pain in the fastutus. He was a hard guy to deal with and was driving me crazy as a program director. And I thought, someday I'm going to, kind of get even. Lou Jack said to me, okay, I'll go with you on one condition, no funny stuff. I lied. I said, no funny stuff. I said, I have a co-pilot. You're in good hands. So we flew to Mattoon, did the appearances, get back at the airport. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. Rich, it's colder than a mother-in-law's kiss. I mean, it's like 10 below zero. So I said to Larry, by the way, I said, I've got something you have to wear. And I reached into the luggage compartment of the Piper, and I put on 2 rubber vests, on inflatable life jackets. I said, put these on. Lou Jack said, why? I said, well, it's an FAA regulation. We're going to be vectored out over the lake, and in case the engines would go, you have to have life jackets. I lied. He said, okay. So he put them on, he and his engineer. We took off, get to about 5,000 feet. The engine, my co-pilot shuts down the right engine. I pull back on the wheel, haul that Aztec up on an angle like this, almost stalling it, and with that, my co-pilot strikes Lou Jack in the chest to inflate that rubber jacket, right, that life jacket. Well, we forgot that it was sitting in that compartment where it was 10 below zero. That rubber was brittle, Rich. So instead of inflating, it exploded and sent shards of rubber all over the cockpit of the airplane. Have you ever heard a wounded owl scream? That was Lou Jack. Bloody murder. Well, I apologized to him, of course, and I said, Larry, I'm so sorry. I said, I'll get you back to Chicago. He said, no funny stuff, no more funny stuff. I said, no. I lied again. We're starting to let down over Chicago, and I turn the cockpit lights on, and I reach out between the pilot and the co-pilot seat, and I bring the big operations manual and set it on my lap. And I start going through the pages. Lou Jack is up in the cockpit in a shot. He said, what's wrong? What's wrong? I said, Larry, there's nothing wrong. I'm just trying to figure out how to land the damn thing.
You should write a book.
I think
No, wait a minute, you did.
Give that serious.
Yeah, Clark Weber's Rock and Roll Radio.
Yes.
Now, again, as the program director, you're listening to all these bands, and you have the opportunity to pick songs, of which many, if not most of them, became hits. Yes. Did you ever have a miscall?
I had a woman who was hired in Chicago with her band. They were there for one night, and the guy fired him. He said, get out of here, and I'm not going to pay you. So she called me, and she said, we've been thrown out after one night. We have no money. We have nowhere to go. I said, get to the radio station. I'll take care of you. So we bunked them in the radio station that night. Next morning, she said, may I use your phone? I've got to call somebody. I think I can get some money. I said, go ahead. And I said, I'll leave the office. No, she said, you can sit here. So she talked to the guy, and he wanted her to record a song, and she didn't want to do it. And he said, look, I'll pay your airfare back to L.A. if you'll record this song. So she turned to me, and she said, what am I going to do? I don't want to do that song. It's a dog. I said, you want to get back to L.A.? Do the song. So she agreed to do the song, went back to L.A., suddenly became a star as a result of that song, but couldn't handle the fame. The song was me and Bobby McGee, and it was Janis Joplin. Sometimes fame hands people just a wicked role. She couldn't handle it. And there were many who, incidentally, couldn't handle fame, and as a result of it, fell by the wayside.
Many, many, many stories, and some wonderful memories. The event that involved a group that we've heard of a few times from England.
Oh, yes. Two people, a man and his girlfriend, own a South Side record store. And they came to me one day and they said, we've got a problem. I said, what's your problem? He said, we got a record and they gave us a twofer. They said if we bought the first artist, they would give us the second artist free. First artist was a guy by the name of Frank Ifield. He had a song called I Remember You. Absolutely. Went to about 20 on the WLS survey and then died. So he came to me and he said, well, look, he said, Ifield is over and now we've got this group and I don't know what to do with them. Listen to the record. So I did, and I said, you've got a dog on your hands. I said, you should put a leash on that thing because it is a real bow wow. He said, I need a favor. Could you play it on the air? I said, oh, good night, no. He said, I need a favor. I said, I tell you what, I'll give it to Dick Biondi and he'll play it on the weekends for 2 weeks. So Biondi played it and it went nowhere. Guy came back a third week and he said, would you play it for one more week? I said, one more weekend and that's it. Well, he lost the contract rights to it. It was picked up by Capitol, and of course the two songs were Please Please Me and Love Me Do with the Beatles. Wasn't too much longer than Capitol called me and said, we want to pay you back for giving the Beatles that big push. And we'd like to have you at a luncheon at the Saddle and Cycle Club on Lakeshore Drive. A friend of mine heard about it and said, oh, my girlfriend would love to meet the Beatles. I said, oh, really? He said, could you get her in to see them, have lunch with them? I said, yeah. Now, you have to remember, this was a job to us. These were 4 teenage kids. It was like they were from Ham and Gary. They were way over their head. They were wealthy. They didn't know how to handle it. They had a handler, if you will, their manager, to kind of keep the lid on them. Otherwise, they were going to explode. So the girl showed up. I sat her next to George Harrison, and Harrison mistakenly thought that she was his for the day, for the night, his arm candy. Well, after about 20 minutes, she said, well, it's nice to meet all of you. I have to leave. And Harrison said, wait a minute, leave? Where are you going? She said, I have a modeling appointment. And she left. Harrison was upset with me. He said I made him look foolish in front of the other Beatles. I said, no, not at all. I said, she's dating a friend of mine. So, make a long story short, later that afternoon, the guy called me and said, Winky was her name, had a wonderful time meeting the Beatles. Could you get her in tonight to Comiskey Park? 32,000 screaming girls, they paid $3.50 to hear the Beatles at $3.50. So I said, yes, I can do that. So the whole thing went off without a hitch, of course, the screaming kids and everything else. And it was over. 25 years later, Sun-Times photographer called me and said, I've got a picture you better have. I said, what is it? He said, I won't tell you. So he sent me the picture, and here it is. Here are the Beatles. Here's George Harrison giving that blonde a dirty look that had walked out on him.
That's Winky.
Winky. And there I am with my hands on my hips looking bored out of my mind because, number one, I couldn't hear the music. Number two, the screaming was so loud. And number three, I had missed dinner and I wanted to go home. Years later when I saw Harrison, I said, do you remember that night? No, he said, oh, I don't. I said, boy, she sure did. People say to me, whatever happened to her? Well, she married a professional football player, ran 5 kids through that machine shop, and gained 200 pounds. That's the rest of the story.
And there are many, many more stories in the book, Clark Weber's Rock and Roll Radio, the fun years from 1955 to 1975. And coming up, we're going to be telling you a story on a deal that Clark Weber could not refuse. But he did.
Boy, I don't even remember this story. Can we make it up as we go along?
We've been doing it so far.
Good enough.
This is V-SPANN.
WLS all day is the very best way to hear the sports, music and song, weather reports all day long. Mama and Daddy know it's good radio all the time, all the time, all the time.
Boy, you're a loser. What'd you give him this jingle for?
Nice looking bunch of frauds.
It's WLS.
You call 11-year-olds frauds.
V-SPANN is a network designed to serve the American veteran. Its mission is to inform, inspire, enlighten, honor, remember, and entertain. Soldiers and veterans will not ask for our help, but it needs to be given nevertheless. Winston Churchill once said, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." This sentiment stands true today.
Veterans deserve this. We owe them, not the other way around.
It's time to pay back our debt to our soldiers and our veterans. It's time for V-SPANN.
We've finally arrived at that point, ladies and gentlemen, where once again we've got to prove to you men and women in the armed forces, wherever you might happen to be, that of all of us, we've got the better deal. Now, we want you to keep that olive drab, whatever you do, and keep those navy blues up tight.
Out of sight.
That's the way I used to wear mine.
You had to, over your head. He's the only guy I know who can take his pants off over his head and make it.
Watch the way you talk.
We're keeping the beer cold, the broads warm, man.
Listen, until we see you again, and we probably will, till you get back into the old broad pattern of WLS Radio back here stateside. This is Mother Weber's oldest son, Clark, saying thank you so very much.
Ron Riley from WLS Radio. Stay out of trade. It's been nice.
Thanks for putting us on.
This is the Veterans Special Programs American National Network, V-SPANN Spotlight. Today we're focusing on radio, Midwest Radio, WLS, the heydays of rock and roll, and legendary Clark Weber, the air personality from WLS, WCFL, and all during the heydays of radio where these powerhouse radio stations were being sought out by artists to get their music played.
Yes.
You had an experience that you recount in your book, Clark Weber's Rock and Roll Radio, about a deal that was made to you.
Yes, it
that
was.
you couldn't refuse.
I couldn't refuse and I couldn't accept. Man brought the record to me and he said, I want you to listen to this. What do you think of it? And I said, it's not bad. Not bad. As a matter of fact, I said, we're going to put it on the air. It's different, but I'll put it on the air. So we did put it on the air, and he got me aside a couple of days later and he said, look, my partner and I recorded this in our garage studio in LA. We need some money for promotion. We're willing to sell you 1/3 of the ownership of this record for, I don't know, it was $10,000 or $12,000. And I said, boy, let me think about that. So I got home that night and I told Joan, and she said, you can't do it. And I said, why not? She pulled out my contract, and it stated that I could not own any part of a record. So I called the guy up and I said, I'm sorry, I can't do it. Boy, he said, I'm sorry too. Well, the record was the Tijuana Brass and Lonely Bull, and that was Herb Alpert, and he and his partner sold that company, about 7 or 8 years ago for something like $60 or $70 million. I still cry myself to sleep on that. A lot.
The experiences that you had. Now, I watched Johnny Carson years ago where Buddy Hackett told a joke that was a little ribald in a way that was totally acceptable. Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot here and ask if you can tell a story that happened at Brother Rice High School with Paul Revere and the Raiders in a way that would be socially acceptable.
Okay, socially acceptable. Let me reframe this. Paul Revere and the Raiders and Mark Lindsay, their singer, were at Brother Rice High School. Packed place. They called me to MC it. And there are screaming girls in the place, and Mark Lindsay was the current boy toy. He was the boy singer, good-looking guy. And the band is playing, and the crowd is stirred up, and Mark Lindsay decides to lie down on the edge of the stage with a microphone and sing to the girls. And they're all crowding around. Of course, Lindsay's on the floor, and he's singing, and one of the girls, and her picture's in the book, she's about 16 or 17 years old, she reached up and grabbed him by his manhood and was holding on. She figured she had her door prize and she was going to take it home. Lindsay is screaming bloody murder. The band starts playing Hold That Tiger. I'm crying like a baby. I'm laughing so hard. And the priests descend on this whole entourage, trying to pry this kid's hands loose from Lindsay. Years later, I see Mark Lindsay. I said, man, you know, all the good times we had. Do you remember the night at Brother Rice when the girl grabbed you? He said, do I remember her? He said, I've still got fingerprints.
Your career is, you've been involved with so many people. The audience who today, I'm sure, still approaches you with their silver dollar surveys.
Yes, they do.
You know, and we're hearing the stories, and we can read them in your book, about the artists. But you worked at WLS, WCFL. I would bet there are some stories about the employees of the places that you worked.
Oh, there were. And unfortunately, they were as funny and as devious as the people who were on the air, but they didn't get the publicity. When I was at WCFL, there was a public relations woman by the name of Mary Sweeney, short, heavy-set, kind of dumpy Irish woman who had a wicked sense of humor. One day I'm sitting in her office and she said, do you want to do something for laughs? And I said, what do you want to do? She said, I won't tell you, but I'll be back in a minute. She went into her back office and she came out dressed as a nun. A nun! I said, what do you want to do? She said, just follow me. And she said, all I want you to say is, yes, sister. I said, what are you going to do? She said, all I want you to say is, yes, sister. Do you understand? I said, I've got it. We went into Marshall Fields, get up on the elevator, go up to the 5th floor. She waits until there's an elevator full of people. We begin to go down to the 1st floor. And about at the 3rd floor, Mary Sweeney announces in a very loud voice, dressed as a nun, oh my God, my water just broke. Pandemonium let go in that elevator, people screaming bloody murder, and she says, Clark! And I said, yes, sister. She said, call Father Mike, tell him to meet us at the hospital, we're going to have a baby. I got out of that elevator so fast, I thought people were going to trample and kill me.
We're talking about the heyday of rock and roll and what radio was and what we as listeners remember it to be. Looking at the state of our business now with the competition we have, where do you see radio in 2 or 3 years?
I see it very challenging. There is still a need for radio. There is still a venue for what they offer because from a cost standpoint, it's an inexpensive way to reach an audience. Your cost per thousand is quite small. Will radio change? Oh, I think it has to, Rich. I think the platform has to change, not unlike the 70s when FM came along and AM had to change, had to adapt. They finally forced them into talk radio. They did not want to go into talk radio. I had left rock and roll by that time, and I was doing talk radio on WIND for 13 years, but eventually even the rock stations had to go into some form of talk radio. But Biondi, Dick Biondi is still on the air today, and he's still playing the Beach Boys and 409, and there's still a demand for that. So that audience may shrink, but the demand is always going to be there.
And it's still free.
That's right. The price is right. Absolutely. Yes.
And you and I first met at WMAQ, and it was 1974.
That's
as
right.
a matter of fact. And in 1975 is when we launched the country format, and then you went on to WIND and began pioneering talk radio.
That's right. When WMAQ went country, they said, Clark, we'd like you to be a country disc jockey because it would just fold so well with what you did as a rock jock. And I said, are you kidding me? You want me to go on the air and play a record introducing it as, my daddy shot my doggy last night? I said, I'm not going to do that. And that's what I went into talk radio, yeah.
I was in Fairbanks, Alaska, and the only radio station that we had up there was a country station. And one of the songs that I remember listening to was, I found another man's hair on my razor. And I said,
That's
you know,
tearjerker.
we'll hold off on that thought. And here I am, you know, country music for 38 years.
You did Daddy Shot My
So
Doggy
you just
last
never
night.
know where you're going to end up. It's where we started the show with.
Practical jokers, the people who created an image of stability and above that kind of thing, were not really that way. I'll give you two quick examples. Wally Phillips, who was on WGN. Nice man, right? Straight arrow guy. He and I would do things to each other, and for the first time I'll tell the story. My wife and I went to Hawaii. We checked into the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, got upstairs, looking out over the beach and everything. The phone rings. My wife picks it up. Yes, this is Mrs. Weber. Yes, yes. What? We'll be right down. Bam goes the phone. Color goes out of her face. I said, something wrong? Wrong! She said, there's a woman downstairs at the main lobby who's demanding to see you. She says you're the father of her unborn child. Oh, now I had a clean conscience, Rich, so I thought, what could this possibly be? So we go downstairs, and here's a flight attendant from American Airlines said, you're Mr. Weber? I said, yes. She said, I have this for you. And it was a card from Wally Phillips saying, welcome to Hawaii. Oh.
Gotcha.
Paul Harvey, good day. Think he was a straight arrow? He was a practical joker of the first magnitude. We both worked at ABC. I was on the 4th floor, he was on the 5th floor. He would try to break his announcer, get him to laugh on the network radio. One day Paul told the story of a woman who walked into Marshall Fields with a dog under her arm. Walked up to the clerk and said, I'd like to buy a sweater for my dog. And the woman said, oh, well, put the dog up on the counter here and we'll try a sweater on and see what size is right. And the woman said, oh, I can't do that. Then she'll know what she's getting for Christmas. Well, the announcer started to laugh. Chuck Bill by name. He started to giggle and cry right on the ABC radio network. He got into a lot of trouble with that. He said, we've got to get back at Harvey. I said, I know just exactly how to do it. Paul Harvey had an engineer who was a pipe smoker. So what we did was we took some clear plastic tubing. We started here and we put the tubing all the way down through his shirt collar and it ended at his buttocks. So Paul is doing the rest of the story. The engineer walks up to the window. Paul sees him. The engineer takes a big draft pull on his pipe, blows it into the tube, and the smoke came right out of the crotch of his back seat.
I'm telling you, you should write. You should write a book.
Yes,
you should.
I
well, wait a minute. You did.
Yeah, I did.
You did. The purpose of our V-SPANN programming is for veterans.
Yes.
You being a Korean War veteran, and it's to also inspire folks. Young soldiers are coming out of the military, perhaps wondering, what are we going to do with your life? It's a terrifying experience to be faced with uncertainty. And there's a chapter in your book here, chapter 7, and I'm going to hand this to you so that you can read this as a point of inspiration when someone is looking at, what am I going to do now? The job market isn't good. I'm losing money on my investments. I lost my house. Things have gone wrong and are going wrong. Read this, Clark, for us.
Oh, yes. It's a chapter 7 entitled, Not All Stars Shine at First. And it reads like this. People fail in direct proportion to their willingness to accept socially accepted excuses for failure. In show business, far more people fail than make it. The ones who succeed do so because of timing, talent, and pure luck. There are also some who simply don't know the meaning of the word quit. And you will fall, any one of a number of times. And people will not remember you for the number of times that you failed. People will remember you for the time that you stood up, dusted yourself off, and gave it another shot.
Our V-SPANN Spotlight was on the legendary Clark Weber. To discover more great stories on Clark's career, visit Amazon.com or Chicago Books Press. This program was made possible through the studios and future broadcast professionals at the Illinois Center for Broadcasting, Lombard Campus, where broadcasting careers begin. Visit BeOnAir.com for more information about a career on radio or TV. You're watching the Veterans Special Programs American National Network. This is V-SPANN.